The sun hung low over the desert horizon, painting the sky in streaks of fire and gold. The wind whispered across the vast plains, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. From a ridge atop the jagged cliffs, a lone figure stood tall and unyielding. His dark eyes scanned the land below with a sharp intensity, a warrior's instinct alive in every fiber of his being. He was Kiona, an Apache whose name alone stirred caution among travelers and settlers alike. His frame was strong, shoulders broad, muscles rippling under the worn leather of his coat, but it was his gaze that commanded respect, a gaze that promised both protection and vengeance in equal measure. Below, the small homestead rested precariously near the edge of a dry creek, its wooden boards groaning under the weight of an unrelenting wind. Inside, a young woman paced nervously, our heart beating in time with the distant gallop of hooves. Her name was Elen, a spirited and resilient soul whose sharp mind and quiet courage belied the delicate curves of her frame. She had come here seeking a fresh start, a life away from the shadows of her past. Yet fate had a way of weaving danger into the most peaceful places. Kiona's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his bow, the leather of the weapon worn smooth from years of use. Every instinct screamed that trouble was near. And trouble, as it often did in these wild lands, arrived with the setting sun. A band of men, strangers with eyes like cold steel, appeared on the distant trail, their horses kicking up dust that shimmered in the amber light. Their intentions were clear from the way they rode, a menace that could not be ignored. From his vantage point, Kiona's heart hardened. He remembered the words he had spoken that morning, a warning carried on the wind so that all could hear. Lay a hand on her, and you'll answer to me. It was not a boast, nor a threat spoken lightly. It was a promise, one forged from love, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond. Aylin was not just anyone to him. She was his bride, in spirit and in destiny, and no force in the territory would dare challenge that. Aylin, unaware of the exact number approaching, felt a chill run down her spine. She paused at the doorway, listening to the soft hum of the wind and the creak of the porch boards. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hooves, rhythmic, deliberate, closing in fast. Her heart leaped into her throat. She had sensed danger before, but nothing like this. The desert, so often a sanctuary, had become a cage. And yet, even in fear, a strange sense of calm settled over her when she thought of Kiona. Kiona didn't wait. With the sure-footed grace of a seasoned warrior, he vaulted onto his horse, a stallion as black as midnight, mane flowing like a dark river in the wind. His eyes never left the approaching riders, calculating, analyzing, ready for the inevitable clash. He urged his mount forward, the dust rising behind him, and the wind seemed to shift in his favor. Every second counted. Every heartbeat could mean life or death. The first man in the group, tall and broad-shouldered, reined in sharply, as if sensing Kiona's approach. But pride, or perhaps foolishness, pushed him onward. He had no idea the resolve of the Apache warrior who now thundered across the plains, a figure of power and unyielding determination. Kiona's lips pressed into a thin line. This was not just about defense. It was about sending a message that no one could threaten those he loved without consequence. Elaine watched from the window, her fingers trembling, clutching the faded shawl her mother had once given her. She wanted to move, to run, to hide, yet she remained rooted, her eyes drawn to the figure of Kiona as he surged across the open plain. There was something magnetic about the way he moved, an almost mythical aura of strength and purpose. The ground shook beneath his horse's hooves, the air vibrating with the sheer force of his presence. And in that moment, Aylin knew that she was not alone, that the man who had sworn to protect her would not falter. The band of riders now noticed him fully, their expressions shifting from confidence to unease. Kiona's reputation was no secret, and tales of his skill had traveled far and wide. So whispered he could split an arrow mid-flight, that he moved with the silence of the desert wind and struck with the inevitability of a storm. Yet no story could capture the intensity of what they now faced firsthand. Kiona's eyes were locked on their leader, a cruel man with a jagged scar cutting across his cheek. He raised his hand slightly, a silent gesture that seemed to freeze the men in place, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. Aylin's pulse quickened. The world beyond her walls had transformed into a battlefield she could not escape. Yet somehow she felt an unexpected warmth, the warmth of Kiona's protection, the invisible tether that linked their destinies. The wind carried his voice faintly to her, calm yet commanding. "Stay inside, Elaine. Trust me." Those words, simple yet profound, gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. The first clash was imminent. Kiona leaned forward, urging his stallion into a final gallop, and the distance closed with terrifying speed. The band of men had underestimated him, and soon they would feel the full weight of his wrath. Every muscle in Kiona's body was honed for this exact moment, yet his mind remained sharply focused on Aelin. It was not anger or pride that drove him. It was love, unshakable and fierce, the kind of love that demanded action and courage beyond measure. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty plains, the first arrow was loosed. The sound rang like thunder, cutting through the quiet tension of the desert. Kiona's instincts took over, his body moving with a fluidity that was almost unreal. He dodged, weaved, and countered, but the larger danger remained. The men were closing in from every side. Their intent clear, their threat very real. Aelin pressed her back against the wall, breath caught in her chest. She could hear the clash, the distant cries, the pounding of hooves. And through it all, she felt the unyielding presence of Kiona, a shield of flesh and spirit against the storm. Yet even as hope surged, a flicker of uncertainty crept into her mind. Could they hold him off? Could they survive the night that was falling like a curtain over the plains? The desert seemed to pause, the wind whispering secrets through the canyons. Somewhere in that stillness, a truth lingered, one that neither Kiona nor Elaine could ignore. This was only the beginning. The danger was far from over, and the choices they made in the next moments would shape their fate forever. Kiona's hand tightened on the reins, his eyes burning with determination. "No one will harm her," he whispered under his breath, the words almost lost in the wind. And with that, he surged forward, a living force of love, courage, and vengeance. Ready to confront whatever darkness awaited him beyond the ridge, the desert night deepened, and the horizon was now nothing more than a black ribbon between the stars and the earth. The distant cries of the approaching riders echoed through the canyon like shadows of thunder, yet Kiona moved with calm precision, his every step measured, every breath controlled. Beneath him, his horse's hooves struck the ground in a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the heartbeat of the land itself. The men closing in did not understand that they were not merely facing a warrior. They were facing a force born of loyalty, love, and unshakable resolve. Elaine watched, her hands trembling, pressed against the cool wooden wall of the homestead. She remembered the stories her father had whispered to her in her childhood, stories of brave warriors and fierce protectors, but seeing one live before her was entirely different. Kiona was no storybook hero. He was real, breathing the same air, riding the same desert, and his presence filled the air with an almost sacred intensity. Her heart ached with a strange mixture of fear and admiration. She had never known such protection, and yet she had never felt so vulnerable. Behind the approaching riders, shadows stretched across the sand like dark fingers, hiding the shape of the terrain. Kiona knew every ridge and hollow here. His people had roamed these plains for generations, learning each bend, each rock, each whisper of wind. That knowledge was as much a weapon as his bow, his spear, or the raw strength in his arms. The men thought themselves hunters, yet they were merely walking into the heart of the storm. Still, Kiona could not ignore the larger truth of this night. It was not just about defending Elaine or the homestead. The men pursuing them were part of a larger threat, a group that had long preyed upon travelers, settlers, and anyone who dared to enter these lands without knowing its rules. Rumors had reached him weeks before, tales of a man called Bracken, a ruthless figure whose greed and cruelty had no equal. Bracken had long sought to take what he could not earn, and Elaine's arrival in the region had drawn his attention. Alana had arrived with hopes of starting anew, but she had unknowingly stepped into the crosshairs of a larger, darker plan. Kiona had sensed it almost immediately, the way the strangers lingered on the trails. The cold calculation in their eyes, the small, deliberate movements meant to intimidate. He had tried to warn her, but the truth of the danger was impossible to explain fully. Sometimes words failed where action spoke clearly. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke from a distant ridge, a reminder that the desert was never forgiving. Kiona's mind raced as he gauged the distance, the speed of the men, and the lay of the land. He realized that a direct confrontation was inevitable, yet he also knew that a head-on clash could be deadly. Each second of hesitation could cost him dearly, yet patience could turn the tide. He urged his horse forward, weaving through the uneven terrain, keeping the homestead within sight, keeping Ellen safe. Elaine's thoughts wandered back to the day she had first met him. The memory was vivid, almost impossible to shake. She had been lost in the brush, weary and frightened, when Kiona appeared from the shadows, calm and commanding, his presence filling the air like a promise. She had expected a stranger to pass her by, perhaps ignore her plea for help. But he had stopped, studied her with those intense eyes, and without a word had guided her to safety. That day had been the beginning, though neither had known it. And now, in the cold desert night, she realized the depth of her reliance on him, the unspoken bond that tied their fates together. The approaching riders were now closer, the thud of hooves against dry earth beating in time with Elaine's own rapid pulse. She had no weapon, no means to defend herself, yet she felt a strange confidence in Kiona's abilities. Still, fear tugged at the edges of her courage. She caught sight of the leader of the group, a man with a scar across his cheek, eyes glinting like shards of ice. He had been watching her from the first, and she knew instinctively that he was not to be underestimated. There was cruelty in his calm, a patience that promised malice in its purest form. Kiona adjusted his grip on the reins, eyes narrowing as he studied the group. He had no illusions about their skill, but he had something far more powerful, instinct, and the burning fire of a love that would not allow compromise. He remembered the vow he had made that day. No harm would come to Ellen while he drew breath. It was more than a promise. It was a law of his heart, unyielding and eternal. As the men surged forward, Kiona calculated each movement, preparing to strike with precision rather than reckless force. He knew the terrain was both ally and enemy. Rocks could conceal, sand could slow, and the cliffs could offer both sanctuary and peril. He moved with fluid grace, anticipating the moment when the first attack would come. Elaine's gaze never left him, though a shiver ran down her spine. She could see the dust rising around him, the way his dark silhouette seemed almost larger than life against the backdrop of fading light. Her thoughts were a mixture of fear, admiration, and a longing she could scarcely name. Each movement he made was a promise, each glance a silent reassurance that she was not alone. And yet, the danger surrounding them was real, pressing in with every heartbeat. Kiona's mind briefly flicked to the past, to the tales his father had told him as a boy. Stories of warriors who had defended their people, of love that had been tested by fire and blood. He had never imagined that one day he would face such a test himself, not for glory, not for vengeance, but for love. Elaine had become the center of his world, and every choice he made now was guided by that devotion. The first arrow came faster than expected, cutting through the desert air with a sharp whistle. Kiona reacted instantly, diving to the side, rolling his horse along a rocky incline. He countered with precision, letting a warning shot fly that scattered the nearest attackers. The desert seemed to explode in motion, the quiet night now filled with the sound of struggle and the scent of adrenaline. Elaine pressed closer to the wall, heart racing, wishing desperately to help, yet knowing there was no role for her but to stay safe. She could hear Kiona's voice, though faint, guiding and commanding, every word deliberate, every tone sharp with intent. He was not merely fighting to survive. He was fighting to protect her, and that knowledge gave her courage she did not know she possessed. The scarred leader yelled orders, his voice cutting across the night. But Kiona was already 2 steps ahead. Every instinct, every movement, every strategy was honed by years of survival and battle. It was a warrior molded by the land, by the people, by the endless lessons of struggle and triumph. Yet this fight was unlike any other. The stakes were personal, and the outcome could change the course of their lives forever. Still, the men pressed forward, their shadows stretching long across the desert floor, dark and threatening. Kiona felt the tension coiling like a spring in his chest. Each second was a test, each decision a line between life and death. Elaine's safety depended entirely on him, and he would not allow failure. Not now, not ever. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a strange, almost sacred rhythm to the night. The desert seemed to watch, holding its breath, as if acknowledging the bond between the warrior and the woman he protected. Every movement, every glance, every breath carried weight, meaning, and consequence. The night was far from over, and the danger was far from past. But in that tension, in that suspense, there was also the undeniable spark of something greater, a love that would not be broken, a connection that defied the harshness of the world around them. As the riders drew closer, and the first clash of blades and arrows was imminent, Kyona's gaze never left Elin. Every thought, every action, every drop of strength in his body was for her. And in the quiet, fleeting moments before chaos erupted fully, he whispered under his breath, "No one will harm you. Not now, not ever." The desert waited. The night held its breath. And the story of love, courage, and survival was only beginning to unfold. The night stretched long and dark. The desert silent except for the pounding of hooves and the distant cries of men chasing shadows. Kyona's stallion moved like a phantom through the rocks and sand, hooves kicking up clouds that shimmered silver in the moonlight. The attackers pressed closer, their shouts sharp and angry, but Kyona's focus never wavered. His eyes were locked on the homestead, on Elen, and on the scarred leader whose cruel grin had haunted his thoughts since the first sight. Every muscle in his body tensed, coiled like a spring ready to strike, yet he remained fluid, almost untouchable as he weaved through the canyon. Elen could barely breathe. She crouched low behind the porch rail, every nerve on fire, her mind a whirlwind of fear and hope. The wind carried the sound of hooves, the scrape of metal, and the echo of Kyona's voice urging her to stay inside. She clutched the shawl tighter, her thoughts drifting back to the day she had first crossed paths with him. Then he had been a stranger. Now he was the anchor of her existence, the one person she trusted with her life and heart. Her pulse quickened as she heard the first clash of steel against wood from the far side of the homestead. The leader, Bracken, had no patience left. He had been watching the young woman, imagining her fear, testing Kyona's limits, and now he saw his chance to break the warrior's focus. He signaled to two of his men to flank the homestead, moving silently in the shadows while others distracted Kyona from the front. But Kyona had anticipated this. Years of tracking, hunting, and surviving had taught him that the desert never revealed all its dangers at once. He slowed his horse near a ridge, letting the attackers close, then struck with precise timing. Arrows flew, and the attackers scattered just enough to expose the flanking men, who were met with a storm of calculated force that sent them stumbling into the sand. Inside the homestead, Elaine's mind raced. She had no weapon, no way to fight, but the fire in Kyona's eyes gave her courage. Still, she couldn't ignore the fact that danger surrounded them on all sides. Her thoughts drifted to the village she had left behind, to the life she had tried to escape. She had thought running into the desert meant freedom, yet now she understood that safety was not given, it had to be earned, protected by hands stronger than her own. And Kyona's hands were those hands? As the first wave of attackers faltered, a second wave approached from the north ridge. Kyona sensed them before he saw them, a subtle shift in the desert wind, the faint snap of a branch underfoot. He adjusted his stance, urging his horse into a sudden charge, meeting the threat head-on. Each movement was fluid, precise, almost like a dance of life and death. Yet even in the fury of battle, his thoughts were with Elen. He imagined her there, waiting, heart racing, trusting him with everything. That trust was more precious than any victory. Meanwhile, Bracken's mind worked like a predator. He had underestimated Kyona, and that anger burned deep. The man was clever, but he did not know the land as Kyona did. He had come prepared for intimidation, not for a fight against someone born of the desert itself. Still, Bracken was cunning. He would not lose so easily. He signaled a hidden rider to circle behind the homestead, cutting off any chance of escape. The trap was set, a quiet menace hidden beneath the moonlight, and Kyona would have to see it before it was too late. Elen felt a sudden rush of panic as a shadow moved across the porch. She ducked instinctively, pressing herself against the wall, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The sense of being hunted was overwhelming, yet the knowledge that Kyona was out there, facing the danger head-on, gave her strength. Her thoughts wandered again, to the stories he had told her of his people, of the Apache traditions, of love and honor intertwined with survival. She realized that the strength she felt wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Kiona's presence was more than protection. It was a shield for her heart, and in that, she found courage she hadn't known she possessed. The desert around them seemed alive with tension. Every ridge, every rock, every gust of wind became part of the battle, part of the test that Kiona faced. He moved like a shadow, slipping between threats, striking before the enemy could react. His dark eyes scanned constantly, calculating, measuring, anticipating. Yet even as he fought with skill and precision, the sense of danger grew heavier. The attackers were relentless, and Kiona knew that Bracken had planned this carefully. Each man here had been trained for violence, yet they had not faced someone with the heart and determination that Kiona carried. As the night deepened, Kiona's mind drifted to the past, to memories that fueled his resolve. He remembered his father, teaching him the ways of the land, the lessons of courage and loyalty. He remembered the quiet strength of his mother, whose wisdom had shaped him into the man he was. And he remembered the moment he had first seen Alan, lost and frightened, and how he had felt a pull he could not explain. That pull had grown into something stronger than fear, stronger than the desert itself. It was love, pure and unyielding, and it gave him strength beyond measure. But the danger was real. Bracken's men were closing in, and Kiona could feel the tension coiling around him like a living thing. One wrong move, one lapse in concentration, and the night could end in disaster. Yet he could not afford fear, not now, not when Elaine's life depended on his courage. Every decision was weighted with consequence. Every breath a choice between survival and defeat. Aylin watched the distant flashes of movement, trying to make sense of the chaos. Her heart ached with longing, a desperate need to be close to Kiona, yet she knew that moving now could be fatal. She thought of the stories he had told her, of the balance between patience and action, and she clung to that wisdom. She trusted him completely, even in the shadow of uncertainty. The night seemed endless. The attackers pressed from all sides, and the desert itself offered no respite. Kiona fought with skill, courage, and determination, yet the sense of a larger threat loomed. Bracken had not revealed his full plan, and the subtle movements of the men suggested something more sinister than a simple attack. The tension built with every passing moment, and Kiona's mind raced to anticipate every possible outcome. And through it all, the connection between Kiona and Alen remained unbroken. Every glance, every thought, every heartbeat carried the silent promise of protection and love, even in the midst of danger. That bond gave them strength, a thread of hope in the dark expanse of uncertainty. The desert, the wind, the distant mountains all seemed to recognize the gravity of the moment. As the first clear confrontation approached, Kiona's eyes never left Aylin. The moonlight caught the curve of her face as she crouched inside the homestead, and a fierce determination filled him. No matter the odds, no matter the danger, he would protect her. The attackers might close in, the night might grow darker, and the threat might become more cunning, but Kiona's resolve was unbreakable. The air was heavy with anticipation. Every step, every movement, every breath carried weight. The night was far from over and the danger far from resolved. Yet within the tension there was also the undeniable spark of something deeper, a love that gave courage. A bond that could not be shattered, and the certainty that the coming hours would test everything they had and everything they hoped for. And as the desert stretched endlessly around them, Kiona pressed forward. Eyes blazing, heart unyielding, ready to face the unknown that awaited just beyond the next ridge. The night held its breath, and the story of courage, love, and survival continued, unresolved and electric with suspense. The wind howled across the canyon, rattling the dry wooden beams of the homestead as Kiona's shadow moved like a predator through the desert night. The moon, pale and distant, cast long streaks of silver across the sand, revealing the shapes of men creeping closer with deadly intent. Kiona's eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating, scanning every ridge, every rock, every hidden movement. The attackers had grown bolder, their shouts now edged with frustration, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that glimmered faintly in the moonlight. He could feel the tension coil like a living thing in the air, thick and heavy with the promise of violence. Elaine crouched low inside the homestead, her hands trembling as she clutched the shawl around her shoulders. Her heart raced, matching the rhythm of the distant hooves, and she felt a pang of helplessness. She had trusted Kiona with her life, and yet the fear gnawed at her, whispering questions she could not answer. The shadow of the scarred leader, Bracken, loomed in her mind, a cruel and cunning presence that threatened not just her safety, but the fragile peace she had begun to imagine in these wild lands. Her thoughts flickered back to the first day she had met Kiona, the day his calm strength had drawn her in like a magnet. That memory, once comforting, now carried the weight of desperation, a reminder that the love she felt was inseparable from the dangers surrounding them. Kiona's horse moved silently, hooves barely making sound against the rough terrain, yet the tension was deafening. He had grown up in these lands, learning every ridge, every crevice, every whisper of wind, as if it were part of his own body. The attackers, no matter how cunning, could not match the bond he shared with the desert. But even as he calculated their movements, he could sense that Bracken had a deeper strategy, a plan hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The scarred man's cruelty had an edge sharpened by patience, and that edge was honed on the thought of breaking Kiona's spirit. From the north ridge, a rider appeared, moving with the intent of cutting off any retreat. Kiona spotted him instantly, calculating distance and speed, anticipating the trajectory of the attack before it even began. He tightened his grip on the reins, feeling the power of his horse beneath him, and surged forward, cutting the path between the attacker and the homestead. Arrows flew, striking the rocks and the sand, a deadly rhythm echoing across the canyon. Kiona dodged and weaved, each movement precise, each breath measured, yet his mind never left Elon. Every decision, every action, carried the weight of the promise he had made. No one would harm her. Inside, Aylin pressed herself further into the shadows, wishing she could do more than watch. Her thoughts raced to Kiona's earlier words, the promise he had whispered when they first crossed paths in these wild lands. "Lay a hand on her, and you'll answer to me," he had said, and those words now resonated louder than ever, vibrating through the desert night. She felt the power of his resolve, the unyielding strength that had drawn her to him in the first place. And yet fear gnawed at the edges of her courage, reminding her of the cruel reality. The danger was very real, and it was closing in fast. The attackers regrouped, frustration and anger etched across their faces. Bracken barked orders, his eyes glinting like shards of ice in the moonlight. He had underestimated Kiona once, and now he would have to adapt. Every man under his command moved with purpose, circling, probing, testing the limits of the Apache warrior who had dared to stand in their way. Yet Kiona anticipated them, reading their movements like a master strategist, countering before they could act, striking with a precision that left little room for error. Kiona's mind flickered briefly to the past, to the lessons taught by his father. Lessons about patience, observation, and the honor of protecting those who could not protect themselves. He remembered the quiet strength of his mother, the stories of warriors who fought not for glory but for love and loyalty. And he remembered the first moment he had seen Aylin, her frightened eyes meeting his. The instant connection that had drawn their fates together. That memory now burned inside him like a fire, fueling every strike, every dodge, every calculated maneuver. Aylin's gaze never left him. She saw the rhythm of his movements, the focus in his eyes, and felt a surge of admiration and longing. He was more than a protector. He was the embodiment of courage and love, a force that refused to be broken. Yet even as admiration and hope filled her heart, the threat pressed closer. Bracken had prepared for this, had studied the land, had anticipated resistance. The scarred leader's cunning was a dark mirror to Kiona's skill, and Aylin knew that the night was far from over. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Every ridge, every rock, every gust of wind became part of the unfolding battle. Kiona's senses were heightened, every movement precise. Yet he could feel the tension building toward a moment of confrontation that would define everything. He sensed the flanking men hidden in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. He shifted his stance, adjusting to the rhythm of the land, preparing for the clash that would decide the night. The first direct contact came suddenly. A rider charged from the north, aiming to cut Kiona off from the homestead. He met the full force of Kiona's counter, colliding with the warrior's unmatched skill and unyielding resolve. The clash sent sand and debris flying, the sound of struggle echoing across the canyon. Lynn gasped, pressing herself further into the shadows, wishing she could reach him, feeling both helpless and in awe of his strength. Bracken's eyes narrowed as he watched from a distance, the plan he had carefully constructed now beginning to unravel. Yet he did not panic. That leader thrived in tension, in the push and pull of conflict. He knew that Kiona's attention was divided, that one wrong move could change everything. He signaled his remaining men to converge, closing the circle, tightening the noose with methodical precision. Kiona's focus remained unbroken, anticipated every movement, countered every threat, and yet the weight of the night pressed on him. The desert, once a familiar friend, now seemed a stage for chaos and danger. Still, he thought of Ellen, of the bond that tied their fates together, of the promise that no harm would come to her. That thought gave him strength beyond measure, a courage that no number of attackers could diminish. Elaine's mind raced. She could hear the clatter of metal, the cries of men, the whisper of wind across the sand. She felt the weight of the desert night pressing down, the danger closing in. And yet the presence of Kiona filled her with a warmth that defied the fear. She realized that their bond was more than love, was survival, courage, and trust intertwined. And in that realization, she found a strength she had not known existed. The circle tightened, and the final wave of attackers approached, their intentions clear, their movements deliberate. Kiona's muscles coiled, every sense alert, as he prepared for the moment when the battle would reach its peak. He could see the determination in Bracken's eyes, the cruel patience, the anticipation of testing the warrior to his limits. The desert seemed to vibrate with tension, every shadow a potential threat, every movement charged with consequence. And in that suspended moment, as the moonlight cast a silver glow across the sand and rocks, Kiona's gaze flicked to Aelin. Her eyes met his for a fleeting instant, a silent exchange of trust, love, and resolve. He was ready to face whatever came, to confront the danger, to protect the woman who had captured his heart and become the center of his world. The wind carried the faint whistle of arrows, the rustle of movement, and the promise of confrontation. The night was charged, electric with tension, every second a step closer to the moment that would decide everything. Kiona's grip on the reins tightened, his muscles coiled, his heart steady, even as the danger pressed from all sides. The desert held its breath with them, waiting, watching, as the threads of fate drew taut. Elaine pressed herself further into the shadows, feeling the bond between them like a lifeline, a tether that refused to break. The night stretched, tense and unyielding, each heartbeat carrying anticipation, fear, and hope. The moment of climax was near, the confrontation inevitable. Every sense told them that the resolution, when it came, would not be easy. Kiona's eyes scanned the horizon one final time, his mind sharp, his heart steady. He could feel the weight of the night pressing down, the danger closing in, and the inevitability of the approaching clash. And in that moment, as the desert seemed to pulse with anticipation, he whispered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else, "No one will touch her. Not now, not ever." The moon shone high, the shadows stretched, and the night waited with them. The story of love, courage, and survival teetered on the edge of resolution, the tension unbearable, the anticipation electric. Every movement, every heartbeat, every breath carried the weight of destiny. As Kiona and Elaine stood at the threshold of the most intense moment of their lives, the first light of dawn broke over the desert, spilling gold and amber across the jagged cliffs and the quiet homestead. The night had tested every ounce of courage, every heartbeat and every breath, yet Kiona stood tall, his dark eyes scanning the horizon one last time. The attackers had fled, scattered by the force of his skill, his strategy, and the unyielding determination that had carried him through the long hours of battle. Bracken's cruel designs lay broken, the scarred leader nowhere in sight, and the homestead finally breathed, free from the shadow that had pressed so heavily upon it. Aelin emerged from the doorway, her face pale but bright with relief. She had watched Kiona move through the night like a shadow, a force of nature, protecting her with every instinct honed over years of survival and training. She ran to him, the weight of fear giving way to overwhelming gratitude and love. Kiona's arms enfolded her, strong and steady, and for the first time since the night began, she felt completely safe. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dust, mingled with the warmth of sunlight, and the tension that had gripped them both melted away. "I thought I might lose you," Aelin whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You could never lose me," Kiona said, his tone gentle but firm, eyes softening as he looked down at her. I promised, didn't I? No one will lay a hand on you. Not now, not ever. His hands cupped her face, his thumb brushing a strand of hair back, and she felt the strength of his promise in every fiber of her being. It was not just protection, it was devotion, fierce and unwavering, the kind that bound two souls together beyond fear and danger. The homestead, now bathed in morning light, felt alive with possibility. The nights of fear, the long hours of tension, and the uncertainty that had pressed so heavily now seemed like distant echoes. Neighbors who had hidden during the night now emerged, drawn to the clearing dust and the faint traces of conflict, offering nods of respect and admiration to Kiona, the warrior who had defended not only his love, but the land and those within it. Yet Kiona's focus remained on Aelin. Every glance, every gesture, every thought was tethered to her safety and happiness. Over the next days, the couple worked side by side, tending the homestead and reinforcing its walls, preparing for whatever the wildlands might bring. Yet even as they labored, the shadows of the night before seemed to fade, replaced by laughter, shared glances, and quiet moments of intimacy that spoke volumes of their bond. They began to talk of a future together, a life that would not be dominated by fear, but by hope, trust, and love. In time, their love blossomed fully. The couple married under the wide, endless sky, surrounded by family, friends, and the blessings of Kiona's people. The ceremony was simple, yet radiant, a celebration of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond that had seen them through the most dangerous night of their lives. Elaine's eyes sparkled as she took Kiona's hand, her heart full of gratitude and longing. And Kiona's voice, calm yet strong, spoke vows that echoed across the canyon, promises not only of love, but of protection, partnership, and unwavering devotion. Life on the homestead settled into a rhythm that was both peaceful and joyful. Kiona taught Aelin the ways of the land, the subtle lessons of survival that had guided him for years. They tended the soil, cared for the livestock, and explored the surrounding plains, discovering hidden springs, shaded canyons, and the quiet beauty of the desert that had shaped Kiona's life. Through it all, they laughed often, shared dreams, and built a home not just of wood and stone, but of trust, love, and resilience. Time passed and their family grew. Children arrived, each one a miracle, bringing warmth and joy into the homestead. Kiona held each child in turn, his dark eyes softening with wonder and pride, while Elaine's laughter filled the air as she watched them run across the plains. The desert, once a place of danger and uncertainty, became a sanctuary for their love and for the family they had created together. Kiona taught the children the ways of the land, the lessons of courage and honor, and a land filled their hearts with stories, laughter, and kindness. Even as life settled into a gentle routine, the memory of the night that had tested them both remained, a reminder of the strength that had carried them through. Kiona and Aelin spoke of it often, not with fear, but with reverence, knowing that it had shaped their love into something unshakable. The scars of the past were softened by joy, the shadows of danger replaced by the light of family, and every day became a celebration of survival, devotion, and the extraordinary bond they shared. As the sun rose and set over the endless plains, Kiona and Elaine grew stronger together, their love deepening with every shared moment. The homestead, once a fragile outpost in the wild desert, now thrummed with life and warmth. Visitors came, stories of the brave warrior and his beloved spreading across the region, tales of courage, protection, and love that inspired those who heard them. Yet Kiona and Alan remained focused on each other, their family, and the simple, profound joys of life lived together in harmony with the land. The children grew under their watchful eyes, learning both the strength of their father and the kindness of their mother. Kiona's guidance and Elaine's wisdom shaped them into resilient, caring, and courageous individuals, carrying forward the legacy of love, honor, and protection that had defined their parents' lives. And though the desert still held its wildness, its challenges, and its whispers of danger, the family thrived, united by bonds stronger than any threat. In quiet moments, Kiona and Alan would sit beneath the stars, hands entwined, hearts beating in tandem. They would recall the night that had defined them, the trials they had faced, and the promises they had made. And in those reflections, they found gratitude, joy, and a deep, abiding love that would carry them through all the days of their lives. The desert, once a place of shadows and uncertainty, now echoed with laughter, love, and the footsteps of a family who had turned survival into triumph. Years passed, and the homestead remained a haven of warmth, courage, and devotion. Kiona and Elaine watched their children grow, guiding them with patience and love, teaching them that true strength was not measured by force alone, but by loyalty, honor, and the courage to protect those you love. The memory of past danger became a story, a legend whispered among the plains, a tale of bravery, love, and triumph that inspired all who heard it. And as the sun set behind the cliffs, casting a golden glow over the homestead, Kiona held Aelin close, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. They had faced the darkness together, emerged stronger, and built a life that celebrated love, family, and the courage to protect one another. The desert no longer held fear, it held promise, joy, and the quiet, enduring power of a love that had overcome every obstacle. In the end, the story of Kiona and Elaine was one of triumph, not just over the dangers of the night, but over fear, uncertainty, and the trials of life. Together, they had built a family, a home, and a legacy of love and courage that would endure for generations. The sun rose, the winds whispered through the canyon, and the homestead, alive with laughter and warmth, stood as a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that tie hearts together. Kiona's strong arms held Elaine, the children playing nearby, and the plains stretching endlessly before them. Life was full, love was abundant, and the dangers of the past were replaced by the promise of a bright, joyful future. Every challenge they had faced had strengthened their connection, every trial had deepened their bond. And every day now was a celebration of survival, devotion, and the simple, profound joy of family. The desert, once wild and unpredictable, had become their sanctuary. The homestead, once fragile, had become a home filled with laughter, stories, and love. And Kiona and Elaine, bound together by courage and passion, watched the sunset with hearts full, knowing that together they had built a life that no shadow could ever touch. Their story, born of danger, tested by the wild, and sealed by love, had reached its happy conclusion. The warrior and his bride, once threatened by the darkness of the plains, now thrived in the light of family, devotion, and enduring love.